Hello and welcome to the It's All Good show. Lucas here for a chat. My name is Denise Belisle, and I'm a serenity expert and positive intelligence specialist. I empower professional empty nesters to rock the second half of their lives so that they can shift from the chaos and the crisis to the oasis. I encourage you to follow me on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/ at Denise Belisle, and just subscribe to my channel, click the little bell, and then you'll get some notice every time one of my video comes up. Or you can also, if you feel that there's something that I say or my guests say, but you would like to talk with me, you're welcome to book an appointment with me. Or if you want to be on the show, do the same. If you feel that you have something to bring to my audience and you would like to share something, please do that. And now let me tell you why I call this show It's All Go. First of all, it's my favorite cup. It's all good. And I also feel that in life, regardless of what happened, I always take things with a grain of salt and I say, hey, it's all good. Because if it's something that happened to me, let's say right now, well, that right now is now the past. And since it's past, I can't change it. So it's all good. And if it's something in the future, well, I'm not there. I can't predict the future. And I always say, whenever I go somewhere, I prepare for something, hey, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. It's all good. If I forget, let's say I'm going on a trip, if I forget something, it's either not that important and I won't miss it, or if it's really important, then I'm just gonna buy another one and that's gonna work out. So regardless of where you are in life, thinking about the future or thinking about the past, always go back to the present. Always be here and say, hey, it's all good. I have a friend of mine, which she said is, okay, it's all good. Now our job is to find out what's good about it. And there's always something. It's like the yin and the yang. There's always a little bit of black in the white, and there's always a little bit of white in the black. And that's what that is. There's always something positive in any big negative situation. And there's always something negative in a really beautiful, positive situation. So, what the purpose of this show is to bring people here and have my friend just express what they do, how they do it. And I hope you get a little bit of nugget of knowledge out of these amazing people that are here. And today, my guest is Marilyn Anderson, and she's a corporate communication consultant. She's an amazing woman. I just had an amazing little dinner, lunch, brunch with her last Sunday, and we could have been there for 2 hours. We just chit chatted and we had a great time. So let's welcome Marilyn without any further delay. Welcome, Marilyn. I'm so happy to have you.
Hello, Denise. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is exciting.
You're very welcome. And it's rare that I interview people that lives in my own town. So I'm glad that you're
Yeah.
here, and I just realized you came from South to go to your place. You could have stopped here and we could have done it together here. But it's all good. You're home, you're warm, and I'm at home, and it's all
Yeah.
wonderful. So I'm
I'm
so glad
sitting
you're
here with pictures of my family behind me
Oh, wow. That's great. That's
and
awesome.
and a silk screen called Fraser Valley Farms that I bought, oh my God, 30 some years ago. It was in a craft show in a place in the park in Burnaby. And it had wooden dowels at the top and the bottom, and there was like a raffia rope that was hung up on a wall. It was raffia rope that came down with a tassel on the end of it. And I took it to a framer in West Vancouver whose specialty was these great big needlework canvases that people had done, men or women, and some of them were like 48 inches by whatever. But his specialty was in stretching them to make sure that everything came out even and
Yeah.
everything. And so that's how that got into a frame. But
That's
I'm a
beautiful.
Manitoba Prairie transplant, and this has a little farmhouse, and while there's mountains in the background because I lived most of my life in BC, but it's something that um, makes me feel comfortable and at home when I'm in
Oh,
here. So I
that's
wanted to share
wonderful.
that
Well,
with you.
thanks for sharing. That's
But you've got
beautiful.
that beautiful piece of artwork behind you that I can
Hmm.
see.
My little angels. So, Marilyn, tell me about a little bit about yourself. You say that you're a corporate communication consultant, and I'm sure, like, a lot of people don't know what that is. I remember that you said that you have studied. communication. So can you explain why you study communication, but what that brought you to do corporate
Well,
communication consultant?
and I didn't start there. My first career was in medical laboratory technology. So I was a lab rat inside hospitals. There was lots of molecules and lots of chemicals, and I worked in small family-sized, like small hospitals in the city of Vancouver. And then I worked at UBC Hospital when it was 1 year old. And we
Wow.
had technology that nobody else in Canada had, because it was so new and it was completely computerized, from like stores to the OR suite, all of the data, patient information, the results that we generated in lab medicine. We'd hit a button, the results would print out in ICU or emergency or whatever. And I wound up being the department head of the data department of lab medicine, where specimens were collected and results were sent out and stuff. And long story short, I wound up with a serious shoulder injury to my left arm, and I am completely left-handed. And it was one of those things where they couldn't do physio, couldn't do surgery. It had to correct itself from inside
Hmm.
the joint.
So that's what brought you to communication?
So a year and a half later, I mean, I had been playing around on the internet, which was relatively new in terms of people using it for sales, and people um, were starting to be known as leaders, teaching people how to do things on the internet. And I realized that I wanted more people interaction. And I went back to a private college downtown, a business college, and did a diploma in communications, because in my department head role, a lot of what I got to do was interact with other departments to make sure that things were working smoothly when they weren't.
Hmm.
And again, fewer molecules, more people.
Yeah.
and so out of that, I got introduced. One of my instructors, in fact, introduced me to a network, and from that network, I met some people that I still work with today.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
And in fact, the fellow who introduced me to the network, he was the fellow who was one of my instructors, was at the business breakfast I was at on Tuesday morning.
Oh,
I
wow.
hadn't seen him in years, and there he was. So, life has this propensity for coming full circle, and
Yeah.
somehow the good people just
They they
pop
found
up.
each other again for sure.
And
But I
so,
imagine after working for so many years and now because of your injury, you say, okay, I gotta go do something. And then you decide to go back to school. So that must have been quite a transition.
well, it was interesting because I had a couple of choices. My dad had Alzheimer's, and at that point in time, I was taking him to appointments during the day. So I could have gone to BCIT and done a year of
Hmm.
communications there, but I couldn't master that and give him what he needed during the day.
Yeah.
So I signed up for this private business college in Belisle, because I could go from 5 o'clock to 10:30 at night, 5 nights a week for 6 months, and come out with a diploma.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
basically it was so that I had some sort of street cred that wasn't like, what do you mean you're doing this? You belong in the laboratory. No, it's not the same thing. And yet, when you're dealing with people and their lives, and the people who are dealing with their critical issues, there's a lot of nuances to those kind of communications, and a lot of hierarchy. Certainly very much more then probably than now, as COVID has, I think, leveled the playing field of people working together in that somewhat symbiotic relationship. And so, long story short, I wind up coming out of that program with an offer from one of my teachers or consultants, to join a business group he was starting. Now, he knew that he wasn't supposed to ask anybody out of that class to be a practicum person, but it was a very small class, and we were all adults.
Yeah.
And so he invited me to have lunch with some of his colleagues. It turned out it was basically a screening session, and out of that, I got an invitation to work with them. So June, July, August, I said, sure, I can do a practicum, because his funding was going to happen
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
September. September came, and his funder dried up. But by this time, I was already representing his company in a networking group downtown at the Sylvia Hotel, where I still go to business
Yeah.
breakfast
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
week. And so I let the lady know, with the Donna Willen chapter, and of her focus networking group. And I called Donna and said, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful experience. Sadly, this isn't working. It's not going forward, this project. And Donna said, then you need to go and print yourself some individual business cards and we'll see you on Tuesday. That was it. Like,
Yeah, come as yourself, never
that
mind
was
the
it.
company.
There was no question. You were doing this for him. You're just going to do this for other people. And out of that came some interesting introductions. I was sitting across from a couple of consultants at a breakfast one morning, and one of them asked me what my background was, and I mentioned a little bit about
Yeah.
medicine. He said, you know something about medical? And I said, well, yes.
Yeah.
And it turned out he was a consultant who was helping a businesswoman launch something that had to do with a medical background. And so what she was setting up actually was a digital service. This was way before COVID. A digital service where somebody in Montreal could order or place a registration to have her mother or grandmother's feet looked after by a qualified foot care nurse, because with seniors, that's a very critical element.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She could book the appointment. She could look at the results. She would get a report from the nurse who did it. All the bookings and the payments went through digitally. This was way before most people were thinking like this.
Yeah.
And what I had was comfort opening the doors with the kind of organizations like the Licensed Practical Nurses Association, many of whom were certified to do that kind of work. And so I was able to be that cross-reference. I built the bridge of communication between what they wanted to do in this company with people who could deliver the goods.
Oh, that's great. So
And
that
so
must have been a really good experience.
yes. And then he had clients that were doing other things, and one thing led to another. And so over time, I got to work with some really interesting people, and I wound up getting one project I worked on was international. I was talking to people who, whether it was in Belgium or Belize, Japan, Brazil, Mexico, people who looked after big boats going through things like the Suez Canal. And I was talking to the managers who controlled those services, doing a survey for this international company that this company that engaged me was doing work for, to get all of this data to assess what they could do better and differently. And sometimes it was, I was on the phone at 2:00 in the morning, because that was when,
Well, you work internationally.
when they were working,
it
it was time zone independent.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would have to go through the questionnaire word by word by word for someone whose main language was Spanish and who had about this much English. And so to make sure that the answers were real, we would have to go through a process of sort of verbal
translation. You got,
yes. And so, but it was lots of fun. And a few years after that, I got a phone call one day from someone who was in Luxembourg that I had interviewed for that. And I had commented online about a book that was written by at the time, a young woman who is now an international coach living in the UK. But she came from a tiny island in the south, like Dominican Republic sort of area. And her book was called The Mango Girl, because as a little girl at 5, she didn't go to school. She went to whatever the train or bus station was to sell mangoes to people getting off the bus.
Yeah.
And he was introducing me to her as the grown-up PhD author and woman of the world that she is. But so all of those things just mixed together, but it was all about building a relationship one call at a time. And out of that, I wound up getting opportunities to work with other people. I worked with someone who was a representative for one of the major accounting firms in Canada, opening up doors with senior executives. So one project I worked on was talking to everyone who was the CEO of a medical company, platform, or hospital in southern Manitoba, to open the door for one of their senior executives, because I could speak the vernacular, because I was comfortable opening doors with that. And I learned early on I had a system. I didn't ever try to get past the senior executive. I would ask to speak to the executive assistant of the senior executive. And the first thing I'd do was introduce myself and say, you and I haven't spoken before. I would like 5 minutes of your time if this is a good time for you. And if not, please tell me when I can call you back. And then I would shut up. And most of the time they would say, yes, I can give you 5 minutes, because most people tried to talk over them and finagle their way in. And all I wanted was help. I wanted to know if the organization I represented, whatever their offer or best value proposition was of value to the people I was talking to. So that person could put me through to the boss if it was a yes, if that's where I should go, or put me through to one of the other department heads. And that was an advantage, because when the boss's executive assistant puts a call through to you, even if it goes to voicemail, and I start out the same way, they're going to reply, because the boss's
Well, you went through the gatekeeper. Once you pass the gatekeeper,
most people try and blow by them. You want to make them your best friend.
yeah, absolutely,
And so
absolutely.
then sometimes they would say no, and then a year later I'd get a phone call going, "Hey, I had your name from. Are you still connected with that company? Because we need them now."
Yeah, exactly. You're just
But
planting seeds. But
it's
now I'm going
relational.
back to my first question.
Yes.
And now that we have a big idea of what you've been doing, so corporate communication consultants, what I got out of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is of course you are being hired by company to create a link between them and another company so that they can do business together.
But the other side of that coin, in which I'm also certified in a couple of different kinds of coaching, is to make sure that inside the corporation that people are feeling safe. Because when people are feeling safe, when you have psychological safety in your teams,
Mm-hmm.
you get hockey stick results. Google did an evaluation of 150 teams, and they couldn't figure out, they had hired all of these people with the same kind of credentials, same kind of experience, same kind of intelligence, same kind of track record. They couldn't figure out why some of them just did this and some of them did that. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually they were introduced to Dr. Amy Edmondson at Harvard, who wrote a book about psychological safety. And I'm certified in
So that's
using,
what you learned from her. You took a course from her.
well, not from her precisely, but from someone who
Or
had learned from
the
her.
certificate.
And
Yeah,
they
that was.
had developed, she and a couple of colleagues in Europe had developed a way of, and if you answered 7 questions, you would get like a bar graph result of where you were on 4 important vectors of communication and safety in an organization. And so when they started to work with, and she had been sending um, senior students, like graduate students, into um, high risk areas in healthcare. So
So
OR suites, ICUs,
okay.
PAR, those kinds of things. And what they found was in her studies that the departments that had the most successes often had the most near misses too, because they would have ways of tracking, an instrument was contaminated or whatever had happened. But it was because they discovered that, or established that, when there was psychological safety in a team, for example, in an OR suite, if a surgeon was reaching for a scalpel
Mm-hmm.
and the orderly, who would be in a much different status level in that OR suite, but if the orderly saw that may have been contaminated, the orderly would feel completely safe saying, "Doctor, don't touch that. You need a clean utensil," and they would take care of it. So there was less risk for the patient. They had more successes.
So if
And
I understand well, so what that means is a psychological safety for team is it allow everyone to have open communication so that if they see that something might be hazardous or
exactly.
hurting someone, to say, well, that's not my job, right? As opposed to say that, they say, hey, be careful. I think you might be not aware of this, but this is the case.
And that's what she had found from her studies. So somebody ultimately, because Google was having trouble evaluating these results, introduced her to Dr. Edmondson and her work, and they were able then to figure out what the skew was and what the difference was, and it was psychological safety within their teams. And that made a huge difference for Google. So it works in small scale things. It will work for families. It will work
So
with
how
people.
would you, I see that happening, for example, for hospital, right?
Oh
What you
yeah.
just said. But how would you apply that for Google? How does that
Well,
change anything
when
with Google?
when one of the interesting things about the scan that they developed was that it gave everybody a chance to see um, a lateral evaluation of of what they were feeling, like to take it outside and um, see it in a format that was a presentation. And I'll tell you what happened to me.
Yeah.
I had I was working within a consulting situation with a company, and I had already been introduced to Dr. Edmondson's work. My friend Neil Pretty had gone through the first um, cohort that was actually certified to use this technology tool that they had used for evaluation that we could
Yeah.
now use. And so I'd heard a lot about this from Neil, but I was not certified at that time. But I got home from this atrocious meeting one Saturday morning. It was just toxic. And I was thinking about what Neil had shared. So I Googled it, took a look at it. I found um, an opportunity on the Mother website to actually take the
To take
scan,
your own assessment.
take my own assessment.
Mm.
So I hit the button, I get 7 questions. And so I put myself back in for question 1. I thought, okay, I'm back in that room. This is what it feels like. And then I answered the question. Now, it was supposed to take, maybe 5 to 7 minutes to do. It took me 15 because every one of those 7 questions, I put myself back in that awful
Yeah.
space
Yeah.
and hit send. And what I got was an evaluation that was so close to the bone of how I had felt
Oh, wow.
that, yes. And I thought, okay, I need to know more of this. So then I hit a button to send an email and wound up talking to Dr. Edmondson. Had 2 colleagues, one in the Netherlands and one in the UK, and they had formed a company that had that technology developed. And it was the leader from the Netherlands who in person answered my email, and then we had a phone call. So then I called Neil, who lives in the Kootenays, and said, okay, I'm in, where do I sign? And I was in the second cohort for
Mm.
certification for that.
But my question is, once after you did the assessment and you
Mhm.
realized, yeah, this is exactly how I felt, did they give you tips of how to heal that and
Well,
how to function like that?
that's why I wanted to do the training. I wanted to see from beginning to end how they took someone, and everyone in that cohort were seasoned, and and very well versed um, consultants and people who had done a lot of work with independent executives as well as teams. So there were 18 of us in that second cohort, and we were from Europe and Australia and Africa and Western Canada, me, and and it was just a fascinating experience. And because while we came from different backgrounds, had different specific areas of expertise, everyone was certified in coaching. Some of them had PhDs, some of us didn't. But it was the experience of going through the background to it, what happens in each of those stages, why they are important, and then going through the experience of doing this again from that perspective. And there were 18 of us in that cohort, and so they had divided us into three groups of 6. And then we got to go through the whole evaluation experiment and see the outcomes from
Mm.
where we looked individually. We could see where we looked as a group was a different matter when all of those bar graphs were immersed together for our group, so that we could see where we were individually versus that. And then to close the practicum, we had to find a group, take them through the whole process of understanding what we were going to do, give them the scan, and then do a 4.5-hour debrief with them, and then write all of that up. So that's how they they organized the practicum of
Oh,
doing it.
yeah, great. So what I understand is that doing the test online just gives you an overview of what happened and understanding. But then if you want to know how to overcome that, you got to work with a practitioner or a certified person so that you
Yes.
can break it down and see, okay, now how would I react differently in the future? How can I heal this situation, that relationship?
And I had a couple of interesting things that happened post that, that were where there was no scan involved. I had been invited um, to interview the C-suite of a tech firm in Vancouver, where the senior executives had put together a questionnaire for all of their employees, and so because they wanted feedback about what they could do to make it better for their employees. They were wonderful, smart, and caring people, and but because the people in the C-suite had developed the questionnaire, they couldn't take each other through the questionnaire.
Mm-hmm.
And so the HR company that was shepherding them through this process,
Yeah.
I happened to know the CEO, and he said, I'd like you to come and interview the senior executives, there are 5, and take them through their own questionnaire. So the first one I got to do was with the VP of marketing. Just happened that he was available, I was available. We spent an hour in the room
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
through what we need to go through with. And as we're coming out, my CEO friend is walking down the hall. So he has a chat with the VP of marketing, and he told me later, I let them carry on down the hall and have their conversation. He told me later on how the conversation went. And he said, I just want you to know this. I asked him how he felt going through that questionnaire with you because I was a stranger to him, right? But
Yeah. 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 No connection. Yeah.
and he said he stood there and thought for a minute, and he said, I felt heard. And I
Hmm.
thought that was straight A's for me. I could not
Yeah. Yeah.
I could not have asked for anything better than,
Yeah.
because that was a safe place for him. I
Yeah.
Somebody he didn't know was holding a space to listen to him as opposed to telling him what he should think. And
Yeah.
that was a lovely feeling to be able to take that.
It gives you a good momentum to keep moving, right?
Exactly. And I see this as, and I think everybody should, I think there's a smaller paperback book about what Dr. Edmondson has put together, but I think that we need to rework this into how families deal with their children. What happens
Okay.
when there's stresses, because you can have psychological unsafety at the Safeway grocery lineup if you want to, right? It
Hmm.
depends on the attitude and framing it. But
Yeah.
I remember how good that felt when he told me later, after it was all said and done, he said that that's what he had said. I felt heard. And I think, how often in life have we all been in situations where we weren't heard, but we
Hmm.
were afraid to voice something that
Yeah.
didn't have sat so well. So that's where this has got me.
Oh, wonderful. So I remember we were talking, you saying that you want to be helping company grow, like in a grow phase, right? So
Yes.
so so what's your goal in helping the company that are in growth phase with
Well,
all the
when
experience
companies are
that you've had?
growing, a couple of things happen. They're probably going to is there is a stretching that has to happen. There may be more people that are being hired. So you've got new bodies interjected. They may not get as much TLC as the people who have built the company have had layer by layer by layer in their awareness. And sometimes if there's a lot of new bodies immersed in a company, it upsets the balance of things. So some people don't feel as respected. Some people don't get either the acknowledgement or the background or the training, the elements that they really need. People make assumptions, and and it is difficult sometimes, as good as all the questions that these companies ask when they're
Hmm.
recruiting. I met somebody during COVID who who had gone through the first stages of being interviewed to join a company.
Yeah.
I happened to know the VP who had actually done the assessment. Um, this person gets on a session thinking they're going to do what you and I are doing now, talking to a live person, and what they see instead is a dark screen with a camera lens. They're answering questions. How inhumane.
And it's so like, it's like futurist, right? In a sense, like you see those movie and people like there's no more human, you're just being interviewed and there's a camera
Well,
and
it
nobody's
would have made
talking.
as much sense for the person who was being interviewed to put their own little robot in front to talk to the camera, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh, that must, and then yeah, that's not good.
no. Well, and the person who was the interviewee in that situation did not get the job. But the reality is that in what's a pretty inhumane way to make a connection with someone,
Yeah.
they're probably better off not getting the job, because if that is how that company treats
Yeah, I
someone
wouldn't want
who's
to work for a
applying,
company
yeah,
like
there's
that.
going to be other things that are going to come up that just carry that through their system
So what
synergistic.
you're saying is the company that was doing that with the camera and all that was a company that was
Was
starting up, or
No, they were hired to do the evaluations for a
uh,
company. So again, it was like third party. Again, you don't
yeah,
have this kind of connection with somebody.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and to walk in now with all the people who are working so remotely since COVID and continue to want to do so, um, that has perhaps shifted a little. You might not worry so much about personality down the hall because you're never actually going to walk past them in the hall or be in the same
mm-hmm,
lobby room
mm-hmm.
with them.
Yeah,
But the attitude behind the company is is still essentially the attitude that you're going to be living with and working with.
yeah, yeah.
And I
And
and I
it makes a difference in the how everybody feels like they belong and they want to evolve in that company, right?
I certified with Dr. Judith Glazer's work on conversational intelligence,
Mm.
and I sometimes think that the title that she picked, may she rest in peace, doesn't do her work justice. But there is a lot of neurochemistry in that. To know when you're standing in front of a team or a group or one individual, and they're clenching their fists, they're uptight, they're giving you yes and no answers, or, two-word answers, that there are things going on in the neurochemistry in their head that it is changing the outcome of the conversation. And there are things you can do to diminish that. And there are things that you might have to do that start with, maybe we just need to rebook this, Martha.
Mhm,
Let's
mhm.
pick another time. I think this might not be the best day for you and I to have this conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then after that, I did the next year. I did Dr. David Drake's narrative coaching, because he is all about getting people to another PhD, to tell their story. Because when they have a chance to tell their story, and that story might be a, a CEO or a CFO who has something that is bothering them just from that day or that week. It's not about a lifeline story, but where are you today, and what is one thing that you need to shift, and how are you
Yeah.
going to go about doing that, and just giving them a safe space. Because the higher the executive is, the less people they have in which to really
To reach
confide,
out. Yeah.
because they're supposed to know what's going on. They're
Yeah.
supposed to be the people calling the
And
shots.
there's always room for improvement for everyone, and it's hard, like if you are that level and let's say the CFO is there, well, you can reach to all these people to have support and all that, but when you're there, like, who do you talk to, who do you reach out to? And it's important to be able to feel safe and being able to have that environment to have a space for growth, for sure.
Yeah, and to feel as that um, CMO said, to feel heard, just to
Mm.
just to know that someone's going to listen
Yeah.
to it. One of my the facilitator of my small group when I did Judith Glazer's work was an executive coach from Toronto. She had been in the banking industry, and she had risen up to the highest of the glass ceilings that anyone in
Position. Yeah.
her position, but in her Canada-wide bank could get.
Wow.
And she had put together a program that she executed on that had 9 zeros behind it. At which point there was no bigger place for her to go at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so she left that and was thinking about what she was going to do next.
Now what?
And she got a couple of calls, and they were from CEOs of companies that had been her clients when she was in corporate banking. And they wanted her to coach them. And
Mhm.
that's how she developed her coaching practice.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
yeah. So
That's
it's
amazing. Like the all the experience that you have and all the shoes you wear or the hat you've been wearing, over the years. I think it's pretty amazing. And I'm so excited that I have you and I've had you on my call. It's already almost, like 35 minutes, so we
oh
could
my
be here
gosh.
all day.
Well, I know you asked me to leave a gift, and I did type it out because I just felt so strongly about it. But it was something that I found in the back of a magazine in a doctor's office like years and years ago, and I did something that I felt very guilty about because I was the last appointment, and it was under about 17 other, red books and those kinds of magazines, and I'm left-handed, so I often flip from back to front is the way I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
looking
yeah.
at it. And I found this piece, and it was written by an 85-year-old woman from Louisville, Kentucky, named Nadine Stair. And it started, "If I had my life to live over again." And she talks about living for the moments and just living one moment at a
Yeah.
time. And I tore out the page and took it away with me, feeling guilty as sin. But it was also like a 3-year-old magazine at the bottom of the
Yeah,
doctor's
yeah,
stack.
yeah.
But
Nobody
nonetheless,
would be
but
well, somebody might have been missing it, as if somebody did that, you would never know about it,
no,
but
they
in the
no,
end,
no.
you
And
know.
but a few months later, my then husband and I, we had bought a sailboat, which we traded in to get a bigger sailboat that we moved into. We lived on it for 2.5 years, a 36-foot sloop, and we named it Moments. I got
Mhm.
to pick the name, and it was
Yeah,
because of that writing, like
yeah,
Moments, that you get to live and choose them all one at a time, and that you get to choose who you're going to talk to, what you're going to say, how
that's
you're going to
amazing.
react. My last story I'll tell you, it'll take 30 seconds, but I was walking west down Granville Street in Vancouver, heading down towards Waterfront Center. So the road steeply slants downward that way. I had just gotten off the bus at Hastings and Granville, and I'm walking down the hill. And there's a young man coming uphill to me. It's like 7:30 in the morning. I'm going for a business breakfast somewhere, and he's walking uphill, and he's got a suit on and a white shirt, and he's slouched a bit, and he's looking down at the sidewalk. He's not looking up. And I thought, my mom always said, make someone smile today. You'll be glad you did. And as he got about 10 feet away from me, he's going uphill, I'm going down. And I just looked at him, and I said, nice tie, or no, great tie, and kept walking. And when I got about 50 yards below, I turned around and looked at him. He had straightened up. Like, it takes so little to
Yeah,
change someone's aspect about themselves. If we
yeah,
just remember that every word we share can be a gift to somebody else, that gives them a
that's
moment
beautiful.
that they will
Thank
never
you.
forget.
That's the great gift you just gave us.
So thank you so much for this. I've loved every minute of it. Thank you
Thank you. And
so
if
much.
someone ever wants to, reach Marilyn, like that's her email, you can send her an email
Yeah.
and
Tell me,
it,
just as a subject line, Denise sent me.
all
Okay.
right,
Then I'll know where you came from.
perfect. Then
Absolutely.
she'll
Oh,
open
and
it.
if you should ever phone me and get voicemail, hang up and send me a text, because voicemail is like the dead letter office of my life, honestly. Anyway, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
this.
much.
Have
So
a
just stay
wonderful
there
evening.
and I'll be right back. Thank you. Wow, I hope you get great value out of all the amazing story that Marilyn told us and our path into where she is now. And she's not stopping. She just keep going. She has so much more life to live. And I can just see her in 10 years being just as active as she is now and keep going and having done a whole bunch more certification and being amazing. So it was such a pleasure to have you here, Marilyn. And as for us, you and I here, people, well, I'm glad you were here. I'm glad you listened. And again, I'll repeat that, but make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'd love to have you there at denisebelil.com under YouTube, and make sure to just come back every week. I have guests coming up every week, and it's always a pleasure. So until next time, be kind to one another, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.